what is the unconscious mind? How do we tap into it? And also, what are some of those layers that you've used to unlock its potential, but at the same time put a halt into it? Because I know there's this dance with the shadow, and it's also influenced with the unconscious mind, and how, we see these eruptions of irrational behavior, quote unquote. So what is the unconscious mind? And if you can go from there, Daniel.
Sure. So let's start out by defining mind. The way doctors and neuroscientists think about the mind is activity of cells in the brain. That's a somewhat reductionistic, materialistic definition, but it's the most fruitful. I think that that we tend to think about the mind as being perhaps something that is insubstantial, immaterial, perhaps spiritual. And that may or may not be true, but it's something science can't address. Science can only address things that are material. So we'll talk about the mind as activity of the brain. There are billions of cells in the brain, lots of different circuits going on. Some of the activity we're aware of, and that's the conscious mind, but the vast majority we're unaware of. And let me give you a very simple example. There are parts of your brain that are responsible for controlling your heart rate and your blood pressure. You don't have any control over that. You can't say, let's take my heart rate up another 10 beats per minute. You can't do that. Same with your blood pressure. And it sounds very primitive, but it's actually unbelievably sophisticated in terms of information processing. Another primitive thing the unconscious mind does is it controls muscle coordination. So if I want to raise my arm, it seems like the simplest thing in the world, but actually it requires control of millions of individual muscle fibers in order to get those joint angles exactly right. So it's extremely sophisticated. Now, as we sort of go up to more and more sophistication, we get things like moods, emotions, desires. We go up higher and we get behaviors that we might label instinct. Now, a lot of people, when they hear the word instinct, they think of something primitive, the sexual drive, the hunger drive, the aggression drive. And that's true, but instinct can also be extremely sophisticated. We get a sense of this by looking at the instincts of animals. If you look at ants, many people have heard of leafcutter ants. Leafcutter ants are farmers and ranchers. They cut these leaves, but they're not eating the leaves. They're growing a fungus on the leaves that they then eat. They're ranchers. They have aphids that produce a sugary liquid that they can eat, and they feed the aphids and they protect its young. This is not learned from generation to generation. This is coded in the DNA as instinct. So if leafcutter ants, with their microscopic brains, are able to have that level of sophistication in their instinct, imagine what humans can have. And human instinct is so sophisticated and so powerful that the conscious mind is unable to take it all in. We can only take in little tiny parts of it. And what Jung called these very sophisticated instincts were archetypes.
Yes, we'll 100% discuss about archetypes, and also discuss a bit about dreams, because that's one of my favorite topics in terms of, Jungian psychology. But I'm very interested because, I was born in a world, like you say right now, it's science is driven by materialism, and I try to hint into it in my previous question, but when I go in, you write this too in Spellbound, when I go into a walk, let's say in the beach, or when I swim in the water, or I walk in the forest, I touch a tree, there is this part of me that I cannot explain, but I know these things are sort of alive. I'm connected to them, and like you write a ton of times in Spellbound, all is one. I know I'm part of it, and it's part of me. But I have to admit, it's not a disappointment or discouragement that because of course modern medicine, and we'll discuss this too, Daniel, is all of the achievements we've accomplished in modernity through materialism are great, but at the same time, I think we've lost that touch with our instinct, with our gut feelings, with our intuition, with the forests. And for example, if I'm walking on the beach and I see a rainbow, I just think, oh, it's a rainbow. It's already classified as science, you know? There's no awe. This feeling of connectedness towards the world is kind of lost. And so why did this happen? Why did we sort of lost faith in, you know, the mythical, magical realm of life, the one that we can really explain yet, at least quantitatively?
Yeah. You know, the unconscious part of the psyche, the instinct, the animal nature that we have, is incredibly powerful. It's incredibly important. It gives us inspiration, energy, interest, and it makes us feel alive. The other side of the equation, the conscious part, is rational and logical. And it's a little bit, from an emotional standpoint, it's a little bit empty. It's a little bit bare. It's a little bit poor. But on the other hand, it's capable of world domination, right? That's what sets us apart from all the other animals on this planet, is that we have rationality. And I think that rationality, one of the places where rationality flowered was during the Enlightenment, when we discovered the scientific method, which is absolutely about reason and logic. And discovering the scientific method suddenly allowed us to explode in terms of prosperity. If you look at a graph of the average productivity of a human being through the ages, it's just a flat line, you know, barely, you know, avoiding starvation, and then suddenly, boom, it takes off exponentially. And that's because of the scientific method, among other things. You know, also new political organizations that allow people to have freedom to reach their full potential. But so much of it was about rationality and science. And so naturally, we became enamored with the scientific method, with logic and rationality. And it has absolutely transformed our world, largely from a materialistic perspective. And because we've kind of fallen in love with it, with technology, with computers, with automation, we have overvalued it and lost the other side. So instead of bringing it up into balance with our instinctual side, we've completely suppressed the instinctual side. And there's a price to pay for that. Throughout human history, the supernatural, spiritualism, has been central to every culture. I'm not an anthropologist, but I can't think of any culture that didn't have as its center some form of spirituality. Mm-hmm. That's not true today. Spirituality, being irrational, has sort of been pushed into the corner as an embarrassment. But I think that the reason why spirituality has been central to cultures through history is because that's part of the way the brain evolved. We need that. Natural selection brought that about. And if you don't feed that to your brain, in some way it's like not feeding healthy food to your body, or not exercising, or maybe even like not getting oxygen, something that our biology demands. And I think that some of the consequences of that is that our unconscious is becoming more and more primitive. And so if you look at the way people interact with one another, rather than having this very sophisticated play of emotions and humor and irony and fun, largely what you see is rage. You know, we've become a rage culture. And so I think that because we have devalued that aspect of it, it's become primitive, and we've lost our sophistication and the value in those aspects of humanity.